Hey Harmonizers, welcome to this episode with Mustang 5562, where there's going to be some big progressions here because we're going to do some feeding by hand, and then I'll show you his first leading, which is pretty exciting. So first off, I'm grabbing some hay out of his little trough there, and basically he does have access to hay 24/7 in the trough, but I had just put a fresh square bale in there, which he gets a new square bale every other day. And then thought I'd see if he would take some by hand because it's like the premium stuff that I just put out versus he was kind of cleaning up the scraps of the bucket before. Always having hay, so it's not like he didn't have the option to eat it, but now it's like, oh, you brought me a new bale and he's checking it out. And it's sometimes nice to use food as a way to just have a positive association, and you can see my body language is very non-threatening, and it's an opportunity to build trust a little bit too, because I'm not going to try to do anything to him while he's eating. So it's not like he goes to grab the hay and then I quickly sneak a halter on him or pet him or something like that. I try to be very clear with my intentions and what's coming, so it's an opportunity for him to see that. And you also get to see a little bit of the patience involved when taming a Mustang, because he's kind of picking up some little scraps on the ground. He's got to finish chewing, and I'm just standing there, not trying to get closer to him or anything. So he's also learning the behavior of like come over to the human and having a reason to come over to the human, rather than like sometimes people will follow horses and you can just hang out with them, but this kind of gives a little bit more of that positive association piece where he's got a very clear reason to come over. Of course, when you're feeding Mustangs by hand, it's important to be very safety conscious, because sometimes horses can be aggressive when it comes to food. And you know what? When they've come from the wild and they've had to potentially fight for their food or their grass, it depends on which area they came from, if it was an area with scarce food or lots of food, but sometimes they have had to fight over that in the past, or they've been skinny, or they've gone through times when it's a little bit of starvation or low food for them because of winter or drought and things like that. So you never really know. So it's definitely something to be done with caution, understanding horses' body language, knowing how to protect your space, all of those pieces, which usually horses are pretty flighty and scared of us to begin with. So usually just by flapping your arms or making yourself big or being loud is enough to get a horse to go away if they're starting to get aggressive. However, it is important to kind of mention here that if, let's say, as he was coming in to take the hay, he pinned his ears and he gave me some body language that suggested he was going to be aggressive, and I just get out of the way, that is where things can become pretty dangerous, where a horse can learn that they can push the human out of the way of the food. And it sometimes can create horses that literally do chase a human out of the paddock. And I've been given those horses before, or offered those horses before, including, if you look way back on my YouTube channel, there's a horse named Peanut that had developed that bad habit. And not because her owners had done anything bad. If anything, her owners rescued her as a foal, and they really treated her and got her healthy and were really careful about feeding her. And then she started to get pushy and bossy, and they didn't keep that behavior in check, and she got really dangerous to the point that they ended up giving her to me because they didn't know what else to do. So we do have to be careful and mindful. So now we're switching gears. There was a lot of rain for a couple days, so you're going to see it is gross and muddy, although if you look closely, he's not knee deep in mud, or it's not even going past his hooves, or it's not even up to his ankles. So even though it looks kind of gross and it's wet and sloppy, because I'm so on top of keeping it mucked, and the base is a gravel base, he's not actually sinking into deep mud. It just doesn't look the best. But instead, what you're getting to see is his first leading, which is actually going incredibly well. And I apologize that I missed some footage in the middle I can't remember what happened, but I don't have the footage of him haltering or me clipping up the lead rope for the first time. There's a little bit of a gap in there. But this is his first leading. You'll see me petting his face. Now, the interesting thing about him, and all Mustangs are a little bit different, and I let them kind of tell me what they're okay with, what they're not okay with, and what kind of order they want to do things. And he is, interestingly enough, totally fine with me petting his face. And that's the spot where he's happy for me to come over, and you can see he's kind of bracing his body language there a little bit, but he's like, yep, you can pet my face, no problem. But it's when I start to try to pet the rest of his body that he gets quite shy and backs up or wants to turn away. So for him, haltering him was actually relatively easy because I was just petting him and then was able to put the halter on. And usually once I get a halter on, depends on the horse, but usually I just leave the halter on and then I can clip the lead rope up. And you can see he's still kind of jumpy and flinchy there. And then I can work on that. And then usually when I'm going to work on haltering, I do the halter over top of the halter I already have. And the reason for that is because usually I want to start progressing the training, and it just makes things go a lot easier if the halter's already there. However, if like timing's not an issue, we can take it off. But in his case, he's got long toes and he looked like he needed the lice mites treatment. So I wanted to get to that point where I could pour that over him. So sometimes healthcare means that I'm going to cheat a little bit and try to do things a little bit faster. And I say cheat a little bit. It's not really cheating, I don't think, to leave the halter on, but some people would say, oh, you could just take it off and put it on and like work on that a whole bunch. And you can, but it does make things easier if I leave that on as well. And then he gets used to holding it. And then that way when I start to use it for pressure or leading, then it's a little bit less intense. But look at his body language here as I start to pet the side of his face and kind of move towards his neck. He goes into that braced posture where he's almost like sitting back a little bit. And when I was just on his face, it was totally okay. And then here I'm kind of working my way down his neck, and he's like, oh, don't get too far down my body. So he was an interesting one where the halter and the leading came quite easily. And that was like more of the first thing we're doing. But I have not pet like his back or his butt or his legs or anything like that. Whereas if you want to look back at the videos of Aoife, who is my previous Mustang, my black Mustang, and she was the total opposite, where I could pet her body and she was totally fine with me petting her body, petting her legs, but she was very reluctant to let me pet her face. And so she was following me around at liberty and I could touch her body both sides all over, but I could not put a halter on her yet. So it took much longer to get a halter on her and start the leading, which meant that getting out of the pen took a lot longer for Aoife. Whereas for this guy, he is going to be getting to go out of the pen a lot sooner because the leading's going really well. Now, for the leading part to kind of determine when do I take him out of the pen because he's following me around, I want to make sure that I can lead him both left and right. I want to make sure I could pet him and approach him like what I'm doing here. And I like them to have at least some type of moment where they pull back and that they understand to still follow me afterwards. Because if they learn to pull away and run away, it can be not a great situation, which has happened to me before. Just one time with the Mustang named Whimsy, where she got spooked by something and then she ran off and ran to a neighbor's, and the neighbor drove over on their ATV before I got there. They drove over on an ATV to try to help to bring her back, and then that spooked her and she went running. So it's always nicer if we have a lot of these things figured out. So if they do spook and they pull on the rope, you want them to understand that when they hit the end of the rope to stop. And it's easier to do that in the small pen because there's literally a fence that's going to stop them. Whereas if you're in a big open space, then they can just kind of keep going and probably just pull the rope out of your hands, because horses are, let's face it, significantly stronger than humans, and it's not a difficult task for them to do. So as you can see, as I'm doing all this, it's just super slow and patient stuff. And now I unclip the rope and walk away. So let me know what you think and if you learned anything in this video. Thanks for watching.
Remember to subscribe and check out harmonyhorsemanship.com for even more learning.